Welcome to the PinkpillRx podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or PinkpillRx.
That's Kators 88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.
Today, we're diving into a topic that often gets politicized or personal, but our focus is on the industry, not the individual. Let me be clear, this is not a judgment of formula feeding moms. Every parent makes the best choice they can with the options and support that they have. This episode is about the bigger systems that are shaping those choices, often without our knowledge.
Today, we're joined by Nicole over at Mother Nurture Consulting and Wellness. She's a highly trained and experienced practitioner dedicated to supporting women's well-being through a holistic and integrative approach. With a background spanning education, public and maternal health, and clinical lactation, she specializes in holistic care, creating safe and transformative spaces where women can reconnect with themselves, navigate life transitions, and cultivate lasting healing. She considers herself a mother worker rather than a birth worker. Committed to creating meaningful change, she also leads initiatives that support families and is an outspoken advocate for the mother-baby dyad. She's an IBCLC with a perinatal mental health certification. She's also a trained childbirth educator and postpartum doula. She has a bachelor's degree in family studies. She holds a master's degree in public health and early childhood education. She is a certified life coach and a trained grief facilitator. She's a member of the Radical Moms Union RAD IBCLC team. She's a United States Air Force spouse, mother, and bereaved mother. She lives and works in Florida with her family. Nicole is here to talk about the predatory marketing practices of formula companies.
Thanks for being here with us, Nicole. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Before we get too deep into the formula topic, can you explain exactly what an IBCLC does and maybe anything else you'd like to touch on regarding your passions?
Absolutely. So an IBCLC is an international board certified lactation consultant. It's a mouthful. So in the world of lactation and breastfeeding support, the IBCLC is the highest level credential that you can achieve. So we consider it the professional certification, if you will. So we are board certified. The field itself has only been around for about 40 years because traditionally, for thousands of years, breastfeeding support was done in villages and in tribes by women and aunties and sisters and mothers. But with the Industrial Revolution and women starting to work and seeing women work outside the home, there was a big rise in formula being used to feed babies versus breastfeeding. And so in the 70s and 80s, a group known as the La Leche League, you may have heard of them, started supporting women with getting back to that sort of lost wisdom of feeding their babies with their bodies. And then from those like grassroots groups, our credential was essentially born. So we've been at this now for a few decades. Our role is to promote and protect and support the provision of human milk for human babies. And so that encompasses lots of things, but at its core, that is our sort of main goal. And we do that with obviously clinical expertise and also quite a bit of counseling and listening and supporting families in more holistic ways too. So not everything is clinical. We have to honor families where they are and work with them individually and meet their needs from a holistic standpoint. But that's a little bit about an IBCLC. Other notable things from that lovely introduction, thank you so much, is that part of my work has extended into the grief space, not only with families that are experiencing or have experienced pregnancy or infant loss, but also specifically with women who've experienced breastfeeding grief. So a lot of times breastfeeding, women think that it's going to be this easy, natural thing, and then they run into challenges. And so what do we do? In what ways are we supporting them when they're experiencing grief or they've maybe experienced trauma at the hands of practitioners who don't really have the clinical skills to support them in the way that they do? So those are two big pieces of the work that I do. And along with that, a lot of advocacy work, as you mentioned, and really trying to be a voice for the mother-baby dyad, and protecting that very vulnerable dyad from corporate influence and marketing.
This isn't directly related to formula stuff, but I want to touch on that grief piece that you mentioned. And we'll just dive right in because I was creeping on your Instagram and I loved a lot of the you had several infographics that I ran across. And one of them was that picture of the iceberg. Right. Mm-hmm. And so there was an image, I'll link it in the show notes so people can go to it. There was an image where you have, the iceberg that's above the water. And some of the phrases above the water said, fed is best. I am grateful. At least I have a healthy baby. But then below, under the water, the things that we don't see are these complex emotions underlying, such as like guilt and fear, partner conflict, unmet expectations, etc. And it reminds me, we did a birth trauma episode not too long ago where it's like this idea that, you experience this trauma, but yet everyone just wants you to say, hey, at least I have a healthy baby, and I don't think similarly to birth trauma, we don't explore breastfeeding grief in trauma. And these women who set out to do that but for whatever reasons, weren't able to, continue for one reason or another. Can we just talk about that grief a little bit, I guess, or a little bit about that infographic and just some of your insights and experiences with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that the iceberg model is such a really helpful visual for us to understand what is going on when we're talking about, maternal mental health in general, which May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month.
I didn't realize that. Great.
We'll be seeing a lot of content for sure on my page and probably others about it. And I will say a little caveat, you'll also be seeing probably a lot of misleading content, which we'll get into when we kind of go over to this marketing piece, because there's a lot of confusing information out there about mental health and breastfeeding. And so we'll kind of put that to the side. I'll come back to that. But yes, what we know from research, so this is not just anecdotal, although I certainly see it anecdotally with the families that I work with, but what we know from research is that the group that is most at risk for complications with mental health in postpartum, when we're talking specifically about breastfeeding, is the group that set out to breastfeed, that intended to breastfeed, and then didn't or couldn't. And for whatever reason, like, you said, they did not meet their goals. And so that group experiences those mental health challenges such as postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, sometimes even PTSD. I mean, we've seen some really severe things that happen for a variety of reasons, but usually what is going on is it's these unmet expectations of, I planned to do this thing with my baby. I want to do this thing. I have this natural drive to do it. And we know that about 84 to 85% of women initiate breastfeeding in the United States. So that's a large portion of mothers who set out to breastfeed. And then something happens, right? Something happens. Women are coming out the other side feeling like failures or feeling grief that they maybe they don't identify that it's grief. So that's a lot of what I see is helping just name that this is a grief. This is a loss. This is something that you had an expectation of, had a vision for, had a plan for, and it's not happening. And that feels unfair, and is unfair when you think about, and when you understand all of the reasons why it probably didn't happen and all of the preventable reasons why it didn't happen, because most of those reasons actually are preventable. And so it's really a process of helping women understand. I believe it's very important that they understand what happened so that they can know where that blame lies, because 9 times out of 10, it doesn't lie with her.
Mm.
It doesn't lie within yourself. There's something systemically, there's something that happened that maybe you don't even know has been happening for decades in our culture. There's marketing that's been slowly infiltrating like our psyche. We don't even realize we're being sold to, and that things are being normalized. And that's everything from formula to the baby marketing space is a little bit out of control, just in general. It's a real thing, and these mothers need a place where they can talk about it and they can understand that their feelings are valid. But again, I think it's really important for them to understand that it's not breastfeeding causing mental health problems. It's wanting to breastfeed and not being able to,
Yeah.
right? And that's a real important distinction, because there's causation and then there's correlation. The group that never intended to and then doesn't, that's a different group, right? They set out with different plans, and then they followed those plans through, and they're cruising. It's that group that wanted to and then those plans got derailed somehow that really are the ones that suffer.
Yeah. Well, let's name some of these things that are not within the mother's control, right? So what are some of the ways that formula companies market to new moms? And why is this considered like predatory in some cases?
So big question, with a big answer. So what I'll start by saying is that when we say predatory formula marketing, I'm really just talking about marketing of formula. It's just marketing, and it's inherently predatory. And that's what this is the challenge. So for anyone listening, this is where I want you to try to go with me on this. What I want you to understand is that the nature of the product, okay, what the product is and who it is being sold to for what purpose, by nature becomes predatory, because this isn't selling cars. Okay, this is selling the one thing that a newborn, that a baby can eat besides its mother's milk,
Mm.
right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is
So
essential for survival.
it's essential for survival, right? So by nature, it's the way that they market, because of what they're marketing, is predatory. Now, specifically, because this end user of this product, like I said, has no other choice other than their mother's milk, they are inherently incredibly vulnerable. Really, the most vulnerable members of our society, right, are our children. And our little tiny helpless children, our babies, are incredibly vulnerable. And then, probably the second most vulnerable member of our society is the postpartum mom,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so the end user of your product is the vulnerable baby, and the person who's going to most likely have the final say, right, it is going to be that postpartum mom. Now, what do we know about postpartum moms? Physically, totally wrecked, right? Trying to
Right.
recover from birth, trying to heal, maybe having pain, not being mobile, all of the challenges that go in with our physical recovery. The hormonal crash that we go through after the birth of a baby, right? Just totally like, who am I? That was that bottom of the iceberg, that sense of self. Like, I don't even know who I am. I don't even know what I'm doing. And then you have, quite literally, and by design, the part of the brain that makes rational decisions, that problem solves, that thinks through complex higher order, thinking and problems. That part of a woman's brain is offline. So for any partners listening, and Jay,
Oh, I'm listening for sure.
you're listening, you're here. That part of her brain is not there, because the other part of her brain that is wired to bond and nurture and protect fiercely is all lit up. And that's a survival. That's because we're mammals. That's a natural thing that happens to our brain. So you're asking this vulnerable mother who is healing, who's got this hormone crash, who has half a brain and not the half that makes, real good, solid decisions. She's also exhausted. That is the perfect storm for fear and doubt. And she's got this brand new baby. And I mean, any mom, you ask, any brand new mom, what's your first job? Feed the baby. It's like, I have one job. I'm supposed to feed this baby. And so when you put an advertisement in front of that mom who is fearful that her baby may not be getting enough, who doesn't have a lot of confidence in her body for so many reasons, who didn't get comprehensive prenatal education. Maybe she took a class at the hospital, it's so, and the formula companies have gotten really savvy, some of these newer ones, and I'll speak about one specifically called Bobby. A lot of people have heard of this company. They're newer to the scene, and so I use them to highlight because they're actually incredibly innovative in the way that they're doing their marketing. But in this world, innovative equals predatory, unfortunately, because one of the things that they've gotten really good at is they don't even sell formula. They sell benefits. They sell benefits. They go, sleep better.
Oh.
Break.
Whoa.
Trust your instinct, right? Dads, bond with baby.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So they come at it from the benefits, which is brilliant from a marketing standpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Right?
it's like Mad Men.
Yeah. It's brilliant. But again, because it's not cars, because it's infant formula, it matters. And because we know that when babies don't get breast milk, they are at higher risk for a variety of illnesses and diseases. And we know when women don't breastfeed, they are at a higher risk for breast cancer and ovarian cancer and cervical cancer. Yeah,
Did you know
you're
that?
right.
I didn't know
Do
that.
you see his eyes?
Yeah,
I don't know if you can see
I've
them.
never heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah, your eyes just got really big because that's not part of our conversation. So if we're going to have a full conversation with people about how do you want to feed your baby, you should know that this also has impacts on your health. And so that's what makes this incredibly predatory. They are selling based on the emotional state of an incredibly vulnerable person who's exhausted, who has fear of failure, who has rampant self-doubt, and the benefit is confidence and being in control again and rest, and the product just happens to be formula.
Yeah, that's
I know.
pretty predatory. I feel like, especially when you really break down,
Right.
the mother's brain at this point and also the end product user. Can I read a couple stats real quick about stuff?
Sure.
Okay. Now I know this number I'm about to give is on a global level, but it does touch on what you're saying about the health benefits of breastfeeding. And I know that the global level conversation is a little bit different than the US based conversation. So just want to throw that out there. They did this study and they found that about 820,000 lives could be saved, infant lives could be saved every year if all babies were breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months and then continued until age 2. Formula companies spend over $4 billion annually on global marketing, aggressively targeting low and middle income countries. Mothers exposed to formula marketing were 3 times more likely to partially or fully formula feed in the early months. That's from a World Health Organization study. And all right.
So like this marketing then, does it then cause mothers who would potentially continue to breastfeed to stop or supplement prematurely because they're seeing all these benefits advertised?
Yes. Yeah. And so when they see the answer to the fear, right? Because remember, it's not, they're not directly saying, stop breastfeeding, use formula, right? It's, you're exhausted, take a break here, and who doesn't want that, right? Who doesn't want this rest? Who doesn't? But what they're not having is obviously a full conversation so that we can have a full informed choice. But absolutely, yes.
It's like you're selling water in the desert.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'd mentioned this stat earlier that 84% of women in the United States start out breastfeeding. And what I found from the CDC, and correct me if you have more current data, this is from 2022, was that only 25% of U.S. infants are exclusively breastfed through 6 months. So we start out at that 84%. And then now we're dropping down to 25%. Obviously, stuff is happening in between there that is greatly impacting.
And it's not that in that many women, they're just waking up one day and their milk supply is gone, right? There's this narrative that, well, breastfeeding, you might lose your milk supply. And it's not, unfortunately, I hate to burst the bubble, it's not just that we don't have paid leave in the United States, because if you look at countries with robust paid leave policies, their rates are just as low. So
okay.
That's not paid leave. Now, I'm not saying paid leave wouldn't be amazing, and I'm not saying paid leave wouldn't help, but it's not. That's
to the crux of the issue here, obviously.
Exactly. That's not the crux of the issue.
Wow. So I'm thinking back. I don't know if you remember this, but so we had a home birth with our third. And I had private insurance, so it wasn't, through the state. And you'll get why I'm prefacing this, because I don't know how they got my information. So, in my midwife, home birth, she doesn't she's not reporting this date. She's not selling the data or reporting it. I talked to her about this because this was so disturbing to me. But randomly, like 2 weeks or a week after she was born, what comes in the mail? A thing of formula from Similac. And who was it addressed to? It was addressed to my husband. Wasn't even addressed to me. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I remember getting it. I had forgotten that it was addressed to me.
And I was furious because I was like, how predatory is that? It's a weekend. I'm going to be tired. He's going to be exhausted, and he just wants to be supportive. And, maybe I could help out by, supplementing or whatever. I saw it all laid out so plainly when I received that package. And I was furious because, again, one, didn't know how they got my data. First of all, because I didn't even deliver in a hospital. I didn't, and obviously they know I'm having a baby. And then they have my address and they have my husband's name. It was wild.
Mm-hmm. That is really funny because I heard that recently. I was giving a presentation for my state coalition on this topic. And I'm here in Florida. And some people were sharing in the audience that was something that had been happening lately with them as well, that the fathers were the ones getting the formula. And so we had a little brainstorm about this. Like, this isn't an accident. Why do we think that might be? Why would that formula come, to dad?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So dad is just wanting to be supportive, seeing you struggle maybe, right? I don't know if that was the case in your situation.
No, for sure. Yeah, we were exhausted.
Yeah, you're exhausted. You've got all these questions, all this fear, all those things we already talked about. And men, not to be stereotypical, but typically, like, you guys just want to get in there and fix it. You just want to help. And it comes from a really honorable place of like, can we just solve this? Can I get you out of pain right now? Can I get you some sleep tonight? How can we make this better? And so when that product arrives to dad, it's like, oh, well, let's try this. It's brilliant.
It is.
Yeah.
Again, the marketing, it's like Mad Men. Like, it is brilliant workarounds that are probably obviously incredibly efficient, because we dropped from 84 to 25%. Exactly.
That's right.
They are working.
Right.
Are there like some lesser known ways? Like, we talked about like kind of big picture, but like on like individual examples, for example, I get formula in the mail after I have a baby, like that women are experiencing this. A lot of women are given formula samples in the hospital. I used to work in the OB. That's a whole other beast to talk about what happens in these nurseries and with exclusively breastfed babies. And he's looking at me. Like,
didn't they give our fourth formula?
They did, and and I mean, I made it very, very clear that she was not to have formula, and they lied to me about it. She had formula on her face, and also you can tell a formula bowel movement versus a breastfed bowel movement, and it definitely was. And but from working in the OB. Part of the reason why I quit postpartum was because I just saw so much unethical things happening. Like we would put these women into crisis basically when they're in labor and stuff, put them into crisis. And then we say, thank God we were here to save their lives. And it was like, whoa, we did this to start with. And then I would see these exclusively breastfed babies that specifically the parents did not want nipples or whatever. And as soon as they got back to the nursery, especially on night shifts, they would give those babies sugar water or they would give them formula and they wouldn't document it. So here's this mom thinking my baby's gaining weight. My baby's doing well. I'm obviously breastfeeding. And so they have to be transferring. They get sent home. Oh, all of a sudden their babies aren't having wet diapers. Oh, all of a sudden what has happened to my baby, and so that was another just ethical issue that was a big deal for me that caused me to step away from bedside nursing in the postpartum department.
And they didn't document that they did this.
Yes, you're giving them a product that is technically supposed to be ordered by the doctor at that hospital, saying that this person is going to be on this formula.
And so women go home with their babies and they're not having wet diapers, not gaining weight, and then you're thinking, oh, there's a supply problem. Is that usually the thought?
Yeah. And legitimately there very well could be, because that baby maybe wasn't latching very well or wasn't transferring or wasn't, and they didn't catch it because the baby's getting fed formula on the side.
And they didn't get support for that.
Yeah. And I don't want to be conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying every hospital does this. The hospital I worked at did this, and I live in a smaller town. And I'm just want to throw that out there. I'm not saying this happens everywhere, but I saw it happen in my community, and it was infuriating to me. And our local IBCLCs that do home visits saw it happening. So this is something that at least, in some areas is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot to kind of unpack there. I think what I'll say is that the infiltration of the formula companies into hospitals, that started a long time ago, right? That started when, and it is still going on, but there are some other ways, as you've kind of alluded to, that the marketing is happening that are actually even much, much more effective. But yes, this issue of hospitals catering to formula companies in the same way they do to pharmaceutical reps, right? So reps come in, they bring a box of donuts, they slap the Similac sticker on there, but the interesting thing is that those are kind of like the big names, right? The Enfamils, the Similacs, the big names, the Nestle, and the scandals sort of the past, which have had devastating consequences that are still playing out today, in countries where they're maybe can't even read the label, right? Because they're sending formula to them and they don't even read English. It's not translated. So they're not mixing it right, and they can't afford the can, so they're watering it down and babies are dying. That is happening today in 2025. And that's a result of those very predatory things that went on, in the 50s, 60s, right? Back in that time frame. Now the shift is towards marketing online because of our social media. And pretty much everyone has social media. And so, I mentioned Bobby earlier. They are a really big front runner to this social media marketing, affiliate marketing. So if, see things being like influencer marketing, right? Everything from like curling irons to nutrition supplements. And now formula marketing is happening. And this particular company, Bobby, is very good at seeking out influencers, not only moms that have struggled with breastfeeding. So what they love to do is they love to pick pick moms that are speaking out about their breastfeeding struggles, because breastfeeding problems are not uncommon, because we have decades of formula feeding being the norm, right? So we have sort of like this foundation of formula feeding is norm and breastfeeding is extra. We say breast is best. Well, I don't even like that phrase, because breast is best implies that, okay, best, but formula is normal. And the reality is, when babies don't get breast milk, they have a higher risk of morbidity and mortality. So we have lawsuits right now for, preemies who have died from necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC. And this is related to Abbott, if you've heard of these formula lawsuits. Anyway, so what they're doing is they're finding these influencers and they're highlighting these stories of women who struggled and said, but this formula, saved my sanity. And when breastfeeding was, making me suffer with postpartum anxiety, which, let's be clear, from a scientific perspective, there is no link between the act of lactating and postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. Again, like we talked earlier, it's the problems that are occurring that are not getting supported, right? The mom who wants to breastfeed and is struggling and then stops. That's what's causing. It's not breastfeeding causing. Breastfeeding itself is actually protective because of the hormones that are involved in breastfeeding. So all we have to do is fix the problems. All we have to do is get the right support, which is, again, where a lactation professional comes in. So the biggest change in marketing is social media, like I said. And a lot of what they're doing with their marketing now is really, it's kind of co-opting like social justice language. So when I was speaking earlier about like selling benefits and, I shared some of those words and it was like, so a lot of the language that you'll hear now is, especially from Bobby, which is, again, the company that I'm kind of specifically speaking about, because they are rapidly rising to the top.
Okay.
So, for anyone who's listening, if you've heard of this company, they kind of positioned themselves in 2018 as this little like starter mom-led company. They are worth millions of dollars. They have two women that are sort of the face of the company, but they're not mom-led. They're completely backed by Silicon Valley male investors. Okay. And that's not a secret. So this isn't like two moms in the kitchen making formula, right? This is a big company. And so they're using things like empowered feeding, triggering, emotional safety, boundaries, protect your peace, shaming, shame-free, all this language that is like belongs in therapy spaces, right? It belongs in advocacy spaces. And so when they use it, it's not to promote any sort of systemic change. Let's be really clear here. They make money when women don't breastfeed, right? And that's like such a key thing here is the formula company makes money when women don't breastfeed. And so anything that they can do to achieve that end goal, they're going to do. When we talk about specifically Bobby, they are really, really good, as I mentioned, at sort of co-opting this like social justice language. And what I mean by that is really the modern values, things that we value today. Well, we value women-led companies, right? We love seeing women-led companies.
Right.
That's fabulous, right? So they essentially weaponize that because they have this face and then there's these male investors. It's the men are making money. And so essentially they weaponize our modern values to sell a product and create brand loyalty. So things like, fed is best, that becomes just trust us. We're here for you. We are your team. When your subscription ends because your baby turned 1, we will have a graduation set. It's like, it's not about the product anymore.
It's interesting. It's almost like they're trying to replace the village in that way, right?
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
we value a village, right? So let's
Right.
think about what are the things we value. We value choice. We value mental health, breaking stigma on mental health. We value not shaming people, not mom shaming, right? There's a lot of this talk in social media, but they're not doing anything to really make meaningful change, right? They are trying to sell their product.
They're just making money.
Just making money. That's right. And they don't look like the villain. And so I think that's where this predatory piece comes in, is that they can do this without looking like the villain. And that's really insidious because they're showing up with like good vibes and, you know, millennial friendly marketing and women coded language, right? It's feminine and it's modern, and their labeling is all green. Subtle messaging it's sending to us, right? So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing with Bobby is that they have actively been working to infiltrate. They don't infiltrate hospitals, but they infiltrate. And one of their favorite spaces to infiltrate is Black maternal health spaces. A really valuable statistic to insert here is that Black women, the most recent statistic on this, it might even be higher. Black women are 9 times more likely to be offered a formula sample in the hospital.
Holy cow.
Just because they're Black. Systemic racism and bias and all these things, right? So that is, right? That is the lay of the land. And so when we have this company who actively is infiltrating these spaces. So what does that look like? Well, they reach out to Black doula organizations. They offer to come to their events. They set up a tent. They give out samples of their product. And some people might say, well, but they're giving out something for free. Like, why is that harming anyone? These might be families that could otherwise not afford it and would have to go with maybe a lesser quality product, right? Not an organic product. Like that's nice. That's helpful. But really what it's doing on a systemic level is it's buying them off. And it's under the guise of trying to get more access for Black families, for example, to doula care. And it really is centering a product over community-led solutions. They also are very sneaky in their marketing to pick apart and disparage exclusive breastfeeding. So what you won't see in a Bobby ad is why our formula is better than Similac, right? Now they'll talk a little bit about, you know, their whole milk, grass-fed cows thing, right? So they have a couple organic ingredients within their highly processed product because formula is highly, highly processed. It has to be, right? It's also not sterile. So powdered infant formula is not sterile. And so, yeah, you're looking at me like, whoa, it's not sterile. Because it goes through so much processing, we know that on average, there can be about, I think the latest statistic is about 14% of formulas that hit the shelves.
No.
Oh, yeah, that don't get recalled, because there's also the ones that, we've got Chronobacter, pull it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you've got this like big mountain of powdered formula in the factory and they test the formula over on this side and it tests negative, no Chronobacter, okay, then the whole batch goes out to market. But there could have been Chronobacter over here, okay?
Right. So they're not quality checking every can. I mean, it's just
so
by the lot.
They don't check every can. It's by the lot. So that's why when you have recalls, you have like this whole lot has to be recalled, right?
So scary.
It is so
and
scary.
that's why we don't discover recalls till after the fact, because
Right.
these people have to actually try it,
Right.
be injured by it.
Right.
And then enough people have to be injured by it for them to even issue a recall.
Mm-hmm. So that's a powdered formula problem, right?
Mhm.
That's not specific to one brand. That's the nature of this processing. But what you won't see when influencers are, you know, talking about these products, we see, and as lactation consultants, it's really scary. We see a lot of improper formula preparation being talked about because for so long, everyone always thought that it was about the water. And in, third world country, it is about the water, right? Or in areas where you've got boil water, or you've got limited, even here in the United States, where you've got unsafe drinking water, then yes, your water needs to be heated and, there's a process to make sure your water is safe. But nobody's talking about the fact that the powder's not sterile. So you actually have to boil water, mix the powder so the water can kill the bacteria that might be present in, I mean, it's a whole thing.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely misrepresented as it being a water problem, like you said, versus a formula problem that, to sterilize the formula.
Right. So then we wonder, okay, well, how come when we have influencers talking about formula, they're not required to put like a little warning label? And then you just have incorrect information. So if somebody does choose formula, because this isn't about individual choices, I and the Radical Moms Union, who does a lot of advocacy work in this space about predatory formula marketing, we fully support informed choice. We just believe that families deserve to make those choices without commercial influence.
And what's interesting is the World Health Organization agrees with you, and they have agreed with you since 1981 because they had the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes or something. And so basically they came out and they said, hey, direct advertising of formula to the public? No. Free samples to parents? No. Gift sponsorships or incentives to healthcare workers? No. Like they came out with this whole big list, and of course we don't follow it or, do what we're supposed to be doing with these regulations.
So it's like how...
Well, I guess they're not regulations, they're opinions. I guess I don't know if there's really regulation by the World Health Organization. Am I right on that? They draft opinion or policy?
So it's essentially recommendation.
Okay.
And then countries either opt to codify that, right? So like turn that law in their countries and then enforce it, or they don't. And actually the United States is essentially the last remaining country who has not signed on.
Is that like how we have pharmaceutical commercials?
Yeah, that's
and
similar.
So many countries don't do that?
Yep. Now, these companies do find loopholes. There are loopholes in other countries. So the code is, not a perfect system, but it would go a long way if we had that as law here, for sure.
I have a question more from the male perspective a little bit, because I think men don't have experience with this. Men don't have empathy with this because we don't know what this experience is like at all, or the pressure or anything like that. No idea. And so the statistic about how 84% of mothers start off intending to breastfeed, and then that drops to 25% that actually complete it to, 6 months?
Yeah.
So I can imagine other guys listening to this being like, okay, but how do we know that 84% drop to 25% is because of formula advertising? How do we know that it's not all these other problems that aren't getting support, and it's solely on the formula marketing and advertisers? And I'm sure you have obviously have a very knowledgeable and have a lot of experience. And I don't know if you could maybe speak to what you have noticed about what actually causes that drop from 84 to 25.
Like what other factors are playing
and
a role?
And I can imagine it's, some of the things you've listed before that are circumstantial, and then formula comes in with like, hey, we'll fix that for you.
Right.
Because these other services aren't provided. But if you could just speak to that for a minute, I wonder if guys who are listening might be curious about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So absolutely, we can't say, right, that it is only because of this. But when I shared earlier that, for example, paid leave, in other developed countries that have robust paid leave, their rates are very similar to ours. And actually in the UK, I think their rates are even worse, and they have a pretty good paid leave policy. So that's one way, is when we compare similar, similar places, and we see, okay, well, in this place, we have this thing and that didn't make a difference. Okay, so what else is happening? Well, the other big piece that happens is certainly lack of support in the form of access to lactation consultants, right? Insurance covered lactation is a relatively new thing.
Whoa.
With the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies are required to pay for lactation services, but I can tell you, as of today, I've got a whole bunch of families that are going to get dropped in a couple of weeks because one of the big carriers out there has made some changes and found some loopholes. So there is a big issue with access to support, as well as all of those things that we talked about earlier, kind of still going on in the hospital, certainly. And then the other big piece is that I don't think people realize is that doctors don't get training in human lactation. And if they do, it's because they took the elective,
Oh.
right? The one elective. So
That tracks with women's health care.
that's right. That's right. So we have this body function, which is what lactation is. This is a function of the body, the mammary gland. This is what it is supposed to do. That is wildly understudied, huge lack of knowledge. And again, with our field being as new relatively as it is, we haven't really caught up to, having a smoother process for referring and things like that. However, I don't want to take away from the fact that all of those things, because there are initiatives to push those things. We have the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative. We have, we're lobbying, to try to get more insurance coverage. Everybody's talking about paid leave. So we're moving in these directions, right? And we can be hopeful that maybe we'll close some gaps there. But it's one step forward, three steps back because of the formula marketing.
Formula basically lobbies against paid leave. They lobby against this stuff you're mentioning.
That's a great point. And so, for example, Bobby has a Bobby for Change is like their whole like advocacy group, and they talk about paid leave all the time. And they're like, we want paid leave, we want paid leave. And yet through the back door, they, along with, these other companies, are actively lobbying against such things because they make money when women don't breastfeed. So we've got this big like Goliath that we're going up against. And so any improvements in these other things really are pretty futile until and unless something's going to be done about the marketing. And we don't feel, first of all, we know that the companies are not going to stop marketing. We know we can't wait for them to stop. We also, as much as we hate it, feel strongly that we cannot wait for the United States to sign on to the WHO code and enact it into law. I don't know if that will happen in my lifetime. So we have to think the Radical Moms Union, which is the group that I'm a part of, we are grassroots, and we are thinking, what are some other ways that we can come at this problem? And so one of them is getting information out there about the Goliath, right? Like really talking about the problem, which we're doing now, and then creating a call to action for families and for professionals, because even our professionals are getting roped into this marketing. Bobby loves lactation consultants. We've had lactation consultants become part of their affiliate programs. Because now you've got this implied endorsement from the profession. And I know you're giving me this look.
Yeah, that seems predatory for sure.
Yep. And so when we hearken back to Nestle in Africa, if you know anything about the Nestle scandal, they reps dress up as nurses and go into villages. And so you have people who don't speak English seeing someone dressed as a nurse saying, this is the best thing for your baby. Right. And we all go, when we hear about that, we go, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. Right. It is. And today, the version of that is the lactation consultant, right? Going, I'm here to support you, breast or bottle, and this is a great formula, and la 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 la. It doesn't feel as villainous, but it is just as damaging because that's the trusted professional.
Sure.
Right.
Oh,
and in the hospital, it's the doctor, right? And the nurses, doing all of that as well. So, it's the things that they're doing are still very, very predatory. And again, it's going to it causes a one step forward, two step back sort of experience of trying to push these things forward.
So based off of your answer, which was very comprehensive and very helpful, do you think it's a fair assessment then to observe that people cannot afford out of pocket an IBCLC when their insurance stops covering it? So the cheaper option is to go for formula because they can't afford out of pocket for the support they actually need. And now their insurance isn't covering it. So what are you going to do? Well, I guess we pivot over to formula because, we can afford doing formula, but we can't afford doing IBCL. Is that a fair assessment or is that incorrect?
So it's a great question and it is incorrect. And I'm going to walk you through it.
Great.
Because I will just tell you that again, I'm in Florida. So rates for out of pocket payment for lactation support is always going to differ based on where you are. But for someone to come see me out of pocket, it's $150 to come see me one time. And I will spend about an hour to an hour and a half with you. And typically, most of the people who work with me are coming to me already with a problem. Okay, so there's that piece. If we could be preventative, of course, that would be better. And typically, it's going to take about 3 to 4 visits for us to work through the problem. So you're at 150 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe $600.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a can of formula, right?
I'm bracing myself.
I was going to say, we've not formula fed our babies. I don't
know
know
what
if
it
you're
costs.
aware of what a can of formula costs.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm scared here.
You're looking at for these what I love to call the bougie brands, these newer brands. You're looking at $40, sometimes up to $50 a can.
And how many feedings?
Oh gosh, you're asking me to do math. You're probably looking at,
or how many cans a week do you go through? Is it like?
Yeah. So the average cost to formula feed for 1 year of life, because you got to remember this is something, once you need formula,
you need formula.
You're stuck with it. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right. So the average cost for formula for 1 year, okay, again, it's going to depend on what you're using. You're looking at probably about $1,500 to $2,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is
So
cheaper if you can do that upfront.
Right.
But the problem is formula at $50 a pop or formula at $40 a pop, I think seems more doable for people who don't have a larger sum to drop.
Right. But the long-term cost is significantly more.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you have the health cost, and that's where we don't talk about.
Yeah, sure.
You have this increased health cost and risk. But again, the way we think is like here and now. We're not thinking about, even for the women, we don't think about, well, actually, if I breastfeed, my children, maybe I have multiple children and I have 6 years of breastfeeding under my belt. I'm like, I'll do the math, but I'm like way more protected against breast cancer than if I didn't do this. That's a cost.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Your kids' health costs?
Well, yeah, this was from a Surgeon General report, but this was like from 2011 that I ran across. But it was talking about at that particular time that we could save $3 billion in health costs if women breastfed their babies for the first 6 months of their lives. So, I mean, that breaks down in different areas, I'm sure, like what we were saying, preventative things with breast cancer and stuff, but billions with a B and an S. And that was in 2011. So my guess is that now it's even more than that.
I just double checked another stat for you. For every 12 months that a woman breastfeeds, okay, her risk of breast cancer goes down by 4.3% for every 12 months.
Wow.
And that is huge. Because it is rising at an alarming rate.
Yes.
So we have to find ways to lower it, because I think breast cancer in young people is rising. And I'm going to edit this out if it's incorrect, because I'm going to have to fact check afterwards, because this is pulling from previous data. But I think it's a 1.4% a year for young people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge increase every year over year in young women that we're seeing. And so by breastfeeding for 12 months, you can
combat some
reduce
of that.
some of that risk.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the partner one of the number one people that kind of this pivots on as far as support goes, that if you have a supportive partner, your chances of breastfeeding is going to be significantly more. Are they the most important person in that woman's life?
So the most important people are the partner, the doctor, and the mother and mother-in-law.
I was wondering if the mothers played a role. Yeah.
They do. But yes, partners are incredibly important. And so that goes back to that formula coming in dad's name, right?
Yeah.
Right.
If you are the linchpin, right? And the one that goes, well, I'm telling her she can stop and I've got this form,
If somebody's listening to this and they're like, hey, I really like Nicole and I want to talk to her about breastfeeding, is that something they can go to your Instagram page and send you a message about and you guys set something up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if you go to my page, at the very top of my profile is my cell phone number. You can text
wow.
me. I am here. I had a client earlier that lives in Louisiana, so completely different state. I've had clients overseas, and I actually just created an ebook all about marketing. It's $6, and people can download it. Again, you can find me on Instagram, and you can download that ebook. There's a link there to do that, and it's a great resource to get sort of a crash course in all of this marketing, and it's written for the parent to be able to say, oh, okay, that's what I need to look out for. My website is mothernurtureconsulting.com. My handle on Instagram is Mothering is Medicine.
I do really appreciate you coming on. I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to address that you haven't addressed, but your insight has been so valuable.
Very educational.
And has totally helped us shine a lot of light on this obvious, very real problem that specifically targets women, children, and families while they're at their most vulnerable. And I don't know if you had any last comments or anything like that. You do not have to have last comments. I just don't want to cut you off abruptly and then you'd be like, oh, but I wanted to say this one thing.
Actually, I do. Okay. So I mentioned just a couple times the group that I'm a part of, which is the Radical Moms Union. And this is something I just want to share just a tiny bit more about so that anybody listening, either if you are a lactation professional, a doula, a midwife, a practitioner of any kind, an OB nurse, or just a mom who is feeling passionate about this, about all these things that I'm talking about, the Radical Moms Union, that's who we are. We're just a group of really passionate people, moms, professionals, some of us are both. And again, we're grassroots, and we get together virtually and we talk about different ways that we can kind of tackle this problem and make meaningful change. And so we've actually got a couple cool projects going on right now. And I will say, just to give us a little bit of street cred, we did last year, we did a virtual nurse-in. So we had a whole bunch of women post their breastfeeding photo, beautiful breastfeeding images, and tagged the Bobby investors. So there was this big kind of hullabaloo about
wow, what a interesting advocacy and movement there.
Yeah. And let me tell you what happened is that the CEO of the company reached out to us, and we actually sat down with her. And we shared our stories. I shared a very personal testimony. As you said in my intro, I'm a bereaved mom. So I lost my 5-week-old son 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And he lived for 5 weeks. And during his life, I pumped for him the whole time. And after he died, I was scheduled actually to sit for my IBCLC boards. I was working in lactation, but I wasn't board certified yet. And so he died, and then I sat for my boards. I got board certified. And then I see that Bobby, this company, has started this affiliate program, and they basically wanted your trauma stories. And they wanted to pay for those of us that are in lactation who have a story of birth trauma or law, anything you want to talk about, to promote their product. And I was completely enraged, because for me, during the worst time in my entire life, the fact that I had this one thing that I was doing for my child, even though he did die, was my lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
And it saved me and my mental health, as best it could, and is probably why I'm still here. I mean, it was so appalling to me that they would try to recruit lactation consultants, and it completely radicalized me. And my credential isn't for sale, and neither is my trauma. And so then I found Radical Moms Union, and I've been a part of this group, and there's just some really amazing change makers. And then just some really passionate people who, like I said, just want to see things changing with regards to how influencer marketing works with formula. So we've got some projects there. And yeah, some other things in the works. So I just wanted to put that out there for any moms or professionals that are interested in being a part of our group. And you can find us also on Instagram. It's the Radical Moms Union.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole.
Yes,
thank you.
Nicole.
And
Thank you, guys.
I will make sure to link both your Instagram and that Instagram in the show notes so that you guys can easily access that.
I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.